Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. Today we're taking a look at a few notable cards out of Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge, as even though it is quite early on in the set's release, there are several things that we've seen trending on the market recently. It's a bit difficult to tell, however, whether that's strictly because of the card's potential, or because there's just so few money cards in the set outside of the QCRs and Phantom of Yubel that players and vendors feel like something else just needs to be more expensive. So today we're going to highlight some of those cards that are trending and discuss why that is, so that we can determine what cards we should be looking to sell immediately for value, or if there are other potential opportunities to buy up other cards that could spike in the future. Let's get started. Kicking things off, we're taking a look at the Phantom of Yubel. So this is obviously the most hyped card from Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge, and I feel like it's the one that the majority of competitive players are going to be after. This card turns Nightmare Throne into the ability to negate any activated monster effect, so a really powerful tool if you're going first. It can be splashed into anything, but it's even more powerful in the Yubel deck, which is now actually pretty strong after receiving support in Phantom Nightmare and Legacy of Destruction, as well as getting the Fiendsmith support coming in the Infinite Forbidden. So I think that for the most part, when you open Terminal Revenge, if we exclude the QCRs, a box is either you pull Phantom of Yubel or it's kind of a complete bust, and so it shouldn't really be a surprise to see Phantom of Yubel with a $65 to $70 price tag. At one point, it looked like this card was trending down towards $55 or $60. I think that would have just been a little bit too cheap for such a powerful card like this, and it also would have made it really difficult for vendors to make back money on the set if this card were to go any lower. The other thing is that I don't think Yubel should be hit on the next ban list or two, as the deck really hasn't done anything competitively. I think it's inevitable that Snake Eye gets hit, right? But Yubel could emerge as the best deck of the upcoming format after the Snake Eye hits, so you sort of have to be ready for that possibility, and so a lot of players opted to just pick up the card right away at the set's release. This card won't be reprinted for quite a while because it is brand new, so I definitely expect it to stay at least $60 for the next little while. I could see it potentially going even higher if Yubel really is a tier 1 or higher deck going into next format. The next card we're looking at is Spiritual Beast Tamer Laura. So I feel like Ritual Beasts were one of the more overlooked decks going into the set, but they actually might be one of the more potent ones. The Ritual Beast deck is a pretty old strategy, but even for those of you that are older players, the deck was never really that appealing unless you were like a hardcore, dedicated Ritual Beast player. The deck just took so long to do anything, but it never actually felt like it was advancing the game state. The deck did, however, get new support here, and Lara is one of the best cards that the archetype has now, as it presents multiple ways to get an additional body onto the field in order to start off the deck's combos. So obviously we haven't had any sort of big events recently, and everyone is mostly preparing for the NAWCQ, but with the Ritual Beast deck, it seems to have gotten a lot of attention from players online. Because of this, we saw a really early price jump with Laura. We knew that Lara was one of the short printed cards in the set, being just as difficult to pull as Phantom of Yubel with about 3 to 4 copies in every case, but it had initially come out at $8 to $10 per copy. Now, however, the card is way up and will cost you between $22 and $25 each. Definitely a bit up there, but the thing I'm not sure about is if it's because Ritual Beasts are actually that good, or if it's just because the deck is like the newest, fanciest toy that players want to try out for a bit, but are going to drop in a couple of weeks. We're probably going to have to wait until the next few weeks worth of regional results before we're really able to see what's going to happen with this card and this strategy moving forward. Moving on, we have another Ritual Beast monster on screen here, and it's Ritual Beast Tamer Elder. However, I'm just using this as sort of a placeholder. I want to actually talk about all of the old Ritual Beast monsters sort of collectively. So as we just mentioned with Laura, Ritual Beasts are getting a ton of attention right now. However, in Terminal Revenge itself, I feel like Ritual Beasts barely had any reprints at all. Like if you look at Infernoids, almost every single one was reprinted, but with Ritual Beasts, there are a ton of important cards for the strategy that were excluded. Tamer Elder is the big one, and it's the one that has spiked to almost $25 per copy. We talked about this card a couple of weeks ago, and it was only around $15 then, so another big jump with the release of Terminal Revenge. But aside from Elder, there are cards like Wen and Altia Pelio that didn't get reprints but are still useful cards in the strategy, so I really do think that they should have gotten a reprint somewhere. That's not to say that they won't. I mean, they could technically be in an OTS tournament pack or maybe in the tins, but we just can't say for sure. I'm bringing this up because I definitely think you guys should be digging through your old holo bulk for old Ritual Beast cards and look to offload some potential value while you can. there's a lot of cards that are worth a few dollars that you can try to offload now before they eventually get reprinted. The next card up here is Oil. This card is very similar to an old card called Salvage. This lets you target 2 level 4 or lower fire monsters in your graveyard with different names and add them back to your hand. Now I feel like cards like this are sort of lost in today's game. The idea of adding cards back from your graveyard is just a little bit slow and the game moves too fast. A card like this is much more viable in grind games where you have multiple turns every game to do what you can. Now that said, I don't think this is an awful card. If we were in a format where a deck like Snake Eye or Tenpai Dragons or Rescue Ace were slower, then yeah, maybe Oil is a good tech card that you can use to recycle resources. However, Oil is actually a short printed card in Terminal Revenge that is quite difficult to pull, and because of this we've seen a small bump up in its price. It was a $2 to $3 card on release and now it's up at $5 each. With this one, I don't really see any decks using this card anytime soon. Obviously, Tenpai Dragons want to end the game quickly, so that won't use it. I think Snake Eye might be able to use this card if they lose Zealantis or some other way to OTK really consistently. So if they become like a grindier deck, then maybe this card is useful. This card can also add back Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, so maybe that's a potential application. But yeah, the game is generally too fast for a card like this. This thing is cheap enough that I'd probably own at least a set of it, or at least pick it up if you can for a couple of bucks, because it is a short printed, so there is a higher chance than a lot of other things that this card will eventually go up in price, but it's a card that I would stay away from at its current market price. Alright, for the last little bit here, we are talking about a couple of Ice Barrier cards, starting with Lancia, Ancestral Dragon of the Ice Mountain. So this card is a level 10 synchro monster that requires the tuner specifically to be a water monster. Of course, in Ice Barriers, this card is pretty easily made with Ice Jade Ran Agrin. This card has 2 effects, and both of them are really useful. For one, if your opponent special summons a monster, you can special summon an Ice Barrier from your hand, deck, extra deck, or graveyard. There's actually a few different targets that you can summon that happen to be floodgates. They're just not really that well known because they're Ice Barrier cards, but this is a pretty neat trick that they can pull off now. The other effect is that if this card leaves the field because of your opponent's card, you can special summon an Ice Barrier synchro from your extra deck and treat it as a synchro summon. I think the big thing that you can summon out here is the original Trishula, since you can at least banish a card from your opponent's hand, and if they Nibiru you, you get rid of the Nibiru and a card from your opponent's hand, so you leave them with only 3 cards in hand for their turn. It seems a ton of players are interested in Ice Barriers, not just me, though I'm not exactly sure if it's because of playtesting and the deck is doing really well online, or maybe it's just some famous YouTuber that's trying to hype up the deck. However, this card is another short print from Terminal Revenge. It was around $5 to $7 early on, but just within the last day or so, the card has shot up to around $15 per copy. This is just a one of, but it's a really cool monster that you guys will definitely want to run if you're planning on trying out Ice Barriers this format. Next up, a card I want to touch on briefly is Deep Sea Prima Donna. Now this card is a generic level 7 synchro, but of course it's a water monster, so you can summon it if you are locked into waters. This card has a couple of potentially useful effects that has led to it seeing some play in Ice Barrier extra decks. It lets you add an opponent's banished card back to their hand in exchange for special summoning a level 4 or lower water monster from your deck. I believe that the main thing that players do with this is summon the Water Barrier statue, an annoying card this format for a lot of players to get around. Also, if you use this card as a synchro material, then that monster can't be targeted by monster effects, which is neat as well. And then if it's sent to the graveyard, you shuffle any banished card back into the deck. So this is a really niche card, but I believe it does have its applications, and with a bunch of eyes on Ice Barriers right now, it shouldn't be a surprise that this card is currently trending. It does have a common printing that should only be around a quarter or so, so you can play that if you don't mind the rarity. However, the original Ultra Rares from Eternity Code are now actually up to around $5 each. Nothing too crazy, but this card hasn't seen any sort of meta relevance before, so it's just something to be aware of in case you have multiple copies lying around somewhere. And finally, the last thing we're talking about here is the Ice Barrier token. So I know it's kind of a weird thing whenever a token is one of the things trending on the market. It's only happened a couple of times, I think, with the Nibiru token and then the Sky Striker token as well. I think that right when they come out, they're kind of whatever, they're really easy to overlook, but if they came out a while ago and then they become more relevant down the road, they are more likely to trend upwards in price. Anyways, with the new Ice Barrier cards, I guess players want tokens to match the deck that they're playing, and I believe that generally you're going to want 3 tokens since Mirror Mage is able to summon 3 tokens onto the field itself. So if you're really wanting to go all out on the Ice Barrier stuff specifically, then this is the way to go. This token did come out back in OTS Tournament Pack 17, which was about 3 years ago or so now, and while these used to only be $1 or less, they're now up to around $7 to $9 each. Now really, to me, this is a lot for a token, especially one that's not like a special one like a YCS token. Personally, I'd be okay with just using whatever for a token, and I wouldn't really care about this one specifically, but whether or not you guys think that this is worth it for your Ice Barrier deck is 100% up to you and your preferences. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. Terminal Revenge, maybe not like the greatest set that's ever been printed, but there's definitely some really cool cards in and of themselves in there. I guess it really is just going to depend on that upcoming ban list and when we get it, and then we'll be able to determine a little bit more how Terminal Revenge exactly is going to shape up, how it's going to affect the format. So yeah, I really hope that ban list drops soon. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure you let me know. Hit that thumbs up button, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.